we know that the struggle is real when it comes to trying to manage weight, trying to maintain a healthy weight. And so for the next few minutes, we're going to talk about emotional eating. What is that about? How do we get there? And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you all will have some ideas of how do we really commit to managing it. So just real talk, some of the facts. And these are things that it's not going to be new to you, what I'm going to share. These are things that you all know because we've all lived there. We've all been there. I personally relate to this topic because I definitely own that I struggle with emotional eating, and a lot of people don't, sometimes feel like they really identify with that, but I'm going to challenge that if you're one of those people. So what we do know, some studies have found that 85% of the people who actually obtain an ideal weight within several years, within a few years, actually, they either regain their initial weight or they exceed their initial weight. And some of you watch this may say, yeah, I've been there, done that. Because it's definitely a common dilemma that we see with people who have definitely problems with weight is that they'll say, I can lose weight, but then I end up either gaining it back or I actually then become larger than I was when I started out. And that's a very frustrating process. We know that those eating patterns are typically unhealthy and they're linked to weight gain and weight regain. And poor stress management is linked to unhealthy eating patterns. And so, as we saw in the clip, definitely as he's dealing with things and he's doing it so unconsciously, he's just grabbing food. And obviously, his assistant is aware that that's what he does because you can see he kind of already preps his environment with foods for him. So, we're going to talk about how sometimes emotional eating becomes such a mindless act. And that's not to say that people who engage or struggle with emotional eating, that they're not intelligent people. That's more in reference to how sometimes it becomes such a habit that we do it so casually that we're not even aware we're doing it. Like in the clip, we saw him just kind of put a sandwich in his pocket and, putting candies in his pocket and just talking. Of course, we know that that was a movie clip, but sometimes it definitely reflects actual, things that happen in life. And then the thing that we're really going to focus a lot on tonight is mindful eating because this is getting a lot of attention and more research is being done on mindful eating. Although the act of mindfulness is not a new concept, is actually one of the main principles associated with the ideology of Buddhism, but it is being shown to be very effective in managing weight loss and in stress management. So we're going to really look a lot at that. And like I said, the challenge that I'm putting out there for you all this evening is it's not going to be about trying to adhere to some strict guidelines, but just committing to maybe one or two things that you think you can do that would definitely help. So what is emotional eating? When we talk about emotional eating, a lot of times the people I see, they'll say, I'm not an emotional eater because I don't really eat when I'm stressed. And so sometimes we simply connect emotional eating with stress eating. And so that is not really an accurate perception of it or an accurate definition of it. So we're going to look at what emotional eating looks like. And one of the things is when we eat large amounts of food, and it's usually what we call either comfort food or junk food in response to an emotion. So it could be any emotion. Some people only think that emotional eating pertains to people who eat when they're upset or when they're stressed, and that's not true. So some of the characteristics of emotional eating is stress eating. Of course, obviously what we saw in the clip where he's eating when he's overwhelmed, when he's dealing with stressors. And then that external eating is more about I see food, it looks good, it smells good, and I eat it. So no, I may not necessarily be stressed, but I just like some people have said, I just like the whole process of eating, from opening up my wrapper to, the whole thing. So external eating is just being triggered by those cues of food, seeing food and smelling food. And then overeating, obviously, is eating when we know that we're full, but we continue to eat. And then, where does that come from? That emotional eating. And we know that it's triggered by rewards. How many times, do you eat as a form of celebration, and that's really common. That's usually that's our sometimes our first go-to things is that, something really good happened. Let's get together. Let's gather to celebrate it. And that's usually centered around food. We know stress and fatigue. Some people definitely, if you're at work, and this is, so I'm gonna like just be really transparent. So I'll use my own stuff so that way I don't offend anyone. I'll just use myself and I'm okay with that. I may sit at my desk and I'm like, oh my God, I feel so sleepy. So what do you think one of the things that I might do to try to wake myself up? Where might I walk to? Vending machine. So I'm gonna go and get something to snack on because I'm tired, and I'll use that to kind of fight that fatigue. And that's real common, or boredom. And then entertainment. We may have had a full meal, but if we plan to go to a movie, some people, say, I just can't watch a movie without popcorn. I gotta have my popcorn. Or we have the Super Bowl coming up, and people may say, you know what, you can't go to a Super Bowl gathering, or you can't watch the Super Bowl without wings and rotel, and you got to have all the fixings. So these are just some of the things that kind of trigger or set the stage for us to engage in emotional eating. And it's usually something that really starts early in life. So, well, one of the things we're going to look at first is how do I determine what's the difference between being physically hungry and emotionally hungry? And that's so important to know, especially when we start talking about mindful eating, because sometimes we really convince ourselves that I'm really hungry when really it's not a physical trigger, it's more of an emotional trigger. So we know with physical hunger, that develops slowly over time. So yeah, if I eat breakfast, by lunchtime, my body's talking to me, letting me know, okay, I'm hungry again. But with emotional hunger, it can hit suddenly. And if you now, so I just want y'all to think about that, your own personal experience with how you eat and how, you may recognize like, man, I need a Snickers or I need a honey bun, and it may just come out of nowhere. And that is a cue that that's an emotional hunger and not a physical hunger, especially if man, I just ate breakfast an hour ago, but I really would like a honey bun. I really just have a taste for that. And sometimes we'll just say, I'm craving it, but actually that may be a cue that we're actually experiencing some emotional hunger. Um, when you're physically hungry, you don't have a food preference. If you're hungry, and if you think about this, if you all have children, and they might say, Mom or Dad, I'm hungry, and you'll say, well, we have some spaghetti left over, and they're responding, I don't want spaghetti. Well, there's some ham, turkey. You think, I don't want a ham and turkey sandwich. So usually, if you're like me, and it's definitely what I heard growing up from my parents and grandparents, the first statement I would say is, well, then you ain't hungry. If you have a preference, you're not hungry. Um, and so it's really interesting because just last night, my sister-in-law, she had gone, she said, yeah, they were giving away food boxes out at the furniture market, and you all may know they've been doing that. And she said, so I went by. She said, now, do you all want any of this? And so I said, why are y'all not getting it? She said, well, we don't like this and we don't like that. And she was identifying things in that. And I said, well, you know what? This food is really for people who really need it, because it sounds to me, if you can be that selective, you're not really in a position where you fit the category for someone who's really hungry. And so, but that's what happens with physical hunger. You don't have a food preference. You'll be satisfied with what you have access to. But with emotional hunger, you crave certain foods. And what do those certain foods usually look like? They look like our junk food, the good stuff, the stuff the carbs and that heavy stuff that's not healthy. But that's usually what we crave. We're not satisfied. Even if you try to eat an apple, you're like, no, I really want something sweet. Or some of that stuff that you have now just kind of developed in your mindset that this is what I'm not going to be satisfied until I have it. With the physical hunger, you recognize when you're full, and you are obedient to that cue. I'm full and I stop eating. With emotional hunger, no, you're gonna keep eating, and and then fall into that category of overeating. So excuse me. So that's something to be, these are just things to really think about and recognize as cues of, and we'll talk about more in a few minutes about how relevant that is when we try to use mindful eating practices to manage weight. And usually when you are satisfying the physical hunger, you're gonna eat, you're not gonna overeat, and you're gonna not, so you don't have negative feelings about eating. But with emotional hunger, what happens? You feel guilt and or shame, because you've done all those things above. You've eaten a bunch of unhealthy foods, um, and you've overeaten more times than not. And so that's naturally followed by that guilt and that shame. You feel bad about it. And so what's really interesting about that, I know for myself personally, what's happened with me is I might say, well, okay, I have a bag of chips, a big bag of chips, and I'll have eaten half that bag. And it's like, oh, I don't know why. Then I'm feeling the guilt and the shame. So what typically happens after the guilt and the shame is not that, oh my God, I feel so bad, so let me just put the rest of the chips up. Actually, what happens in reverse? Well, I might as well go ahead and finish this bag off. I've already overeaten. I already feel bad about it, so I'm just going to finish it off. So then you eat more, and then of course you feel even more guilt and more shame. And so now is a really good time, if you haven't already done that, is to really start paying attention to um, physical versus emotional hunger. Like I said, and as we talk about the mindful eating, that will become, which we'll talk about how do you kind of slow down and recognize that and ask yourself those questions. So in order to first think about how you are going to try to manage it, it's really important to understand how did I even end up here? So having a really good understanding of your relationship with food is so important because it helps you really recognize what your triggers are and help you put a good plan in place to how to manage, because often those triggers don't disappear. They may show up in different situations. So understanding kind of what is my food roadmap? And we all have a food roadmap. Now, this is not my personal food roadmap. I just kind of randomly selected things that sometimes I may hear from others. But it's just kind of going back and doing some self-assessment at this point and looking at kind of how did my relationship with food begin to develop over the years, and how has it kind of progressed through the years. And so on this roadmap, you can see there are just some key markers in this person's life. Like dad takes me to get ice cream every Friday after school. So with that, when we talked about rewards or just spending time together, that's an association right there. Is ice cream, spending time with my dad. That's a really good feeling. Um, so then we start building on that. When we go to grandparents, we can't play unless we clean our plate. That is a common trigger or cue or point on a person's food roadmap that I hear a lot, is that we had to clean our plate. And so um, there's just this belief that, I can't throw away food. I grew up in a single parent home. So, my mother, sometimes, it was just hard. So I recognized later on in life that one of the things that, if this was my roadmap, would be on there, is that I almost feel guilty when I would throw away food. So I would feel like, I really do need to eat this because it's just almost wrong to throw away this food when you think about how hard it is for some people to get that. And so, like I said, you can just see some examples. And the thing is, I just wanted to give you a visual to help you understand how to kind of go back if you haven't already done this, because so many people make decisions about how they want to lose weight and how they're going to lose weight, whether it's the diets or having an actual surgical procedure, but they really haven't spent time understanding their relationship with food. So they kind of look at a decision like surgery, that this is going to solve it for me, this is going to fix it. But without that really thorough assessment, they find themselves still sometimes hitting the wall and still struggling with how to maintain and how to manage. And so I really encourage everyone to go back and really do some reviewing and some assessment of how they what their relationship with food really looks like and where it comes from. What are those key experiences in your life or milestones that where you could observe things really shifting for you, whether it shifted in a period where you not really did well and I lost all the weight, what was going on then versus when it shifted back. And so a good thing to do is this is just a mindful eating cycle before we start talking about mindfulness is to kind of start first of all assessing where am I if you've already if you and it doesn't even matter if you're like I've been successful, I've had a weight loss procedure done or a bariatric procedure done, I'm sorry, and I'm doing really well. I think mindful eating cycle is really still a good thing to do because once again, it really helps you understand your relationship with food. It helps you identify triggers. And so one thing that you can do is just look at, why am I eating? That goes back to that question. Is it a physical hunger? Is it an emotional hunger? When do I typically eat? So these are things that you would keep in a food log. You're just journaling. What am I eating when I eat? How do I eat? So sometimes, because we live in just right now society, so often we're eating while we're driving, we're eating in a hurry, we're eating on the go, we're eating standing up, we're eating when we're walking out the door. And so those things come back and they come back and they hurt us in a way um, that relates to that weight gain or regain and how much am I consuming. So these are things that you would actually kind of keep track of and log. And then where do I put my energy when I eat? After I eat, am I still just kind of sitting on the couch, just relaxing, watching TV? And so these are just some good questions to ask yourself if you are at a place right now where you're like, I'm kind of my weight is fluctuating or I feel like I'm slipping back to some unhealthy behaviors to look at. Let me do some assessment and start keeping a food log and recognizing these patterns. And then once you do that, you're really putting yourself in the position of being more mindful about how you eat. And as I said before, the mindful eating is really about it's like I said, the whole concept of mindfulness comes, I'm not gonna say it comes from because someone probably could find some research to say it didn't start with Buddhism, but it is a very common concept in that practice where it's about staying in the moment, being aware of what's going on, regardless of what you're doing. But for this particular topic that we're discussing, mindful eating is about being in the moment, being very present with the whole process of eating. So you're paying attention to the entire experience. And that doesn't include just when you sit down and eat. That includes the very beginning of purchasing your food, prepping your food, serving your food, eating your food. And so that means I am consciously thinking about every part of that experience. I'm sorry, I have a cold, but I'm thinking about every detail of that experience, and I'm not going to be distracted by anything else. And I can tell you from my own personal experience that this is something that I have been doing. I've been very intentional about doing, and it makes a difference when I'm engaged in that, when I go to Walmart to get groceries versus when I don't. For example, if you ever, you all probably know this, I know you've heard this, like don't go to the store when you're hungry because you just everything looks good and you overspend and you overbuy and you pick up a lot of unhealthy things. But when you're doing this mindfully, you're thinking about what each thing you select means to you. Why are you picking it out? What type of emotions does it trigger when you're selecting these items? And so, and that's what mindfulness is being about. And what research finds is that when people engage in mindful eating, it does help them manage their food cravings, helps them maintain healthy weight, and it helps them manage stress. And so at the very end, I am going to show you a couple of resources that you can go back if you're interested in just looking at research behind this, you can go to and look that up. But yeah, mindful eating is very powerful. And we know it's not the only tool that you need to use or you will use. to maintain a healthier lifestyle. But it's definitely one of the tools that I think is just as beneficial as exercising and some of those other things that you all may learn um, as you've gone through this process. So, like I said, mindfully, that's something that's with you all the time because you know you're thinking. So we're going to look at just how to actually do this. And if anybody, like I said, have any questions or comments, please feel free to unmute and share. So strategies, because I think this is what's really key. And I think it's so important because it is so frustrating to, to go on this roller coaster with weight. And that in itself creates stress. And so these strategies that you'll use for mindful eating, they're so good because it helps you identify what's really going on with you, which then helps you make really conscious decisions about how to really deal with what's going on. So that directly helps you with stress management because now you're just not using food to do that, which is a temporary fix, just like any other thing that we use, whether it's alcohol, gambling, or whatever that we choose that's unhealthy that is in the moment, it feels good, but the realities of it, the consequences are usually not good. So, one of the things in mindful eating is just take a deep breath. Once again, thinking about the fast paced, the right now society that we live in and how we incorporate that in our own lives, what that looks like in our own lives, and how many times before you go to the refrigerator do you really stop, take a deep breath, and really think about, am I hungry? Am I really hungry right now? Um, the research that they say that um, it takes your brain 20 minutes to identify that you're full. So unfortunately, what happens, especially if we are like overeating, we'll eat and we're eating fast. We'll eat before, or we would have overeaten before it has registered with us that we're full. And I think about how sometimes when you eat and you'll say, man, I'm so stuffed, oh, I feel so stuffed now. Usually because we really have eaten fast, we've eaten too much, and our brain hasn't had time to really register where we are in the process of fullness. So taking those deep breaths allows us to really think about, okay, is this a physical hunger? Is this an emotional hunger? Because we'll say that to our kids a lot of times, definitely, like even during the quarantine and all that, I have a teenager at home and it's like, I know for a lot of people they're like, oh my God, they're eating all the time, and they're not hungry, they cannot be hungry, but they're bored, and so they'll go to the refrigerator 100 times. Well, as adults we do that too. We'll go to the refrigerator just because out of boredom, and that is an emotion. And some people say, I don't feel stressed. I'm like, yeah, but you are still experiencing an emotion that's associated with your choice. Because the thing about the emotional eating, that's a behavior. And so the problem is not that's sometimes we'll focus on, I've got to stop emotional. We're trying to figure out how to not eat emotionally without really looking at strategies that we have to engage in from a behavioral standpoint. So sometimes we may say, well, I'm just not going to buy junk food, which that is a good strategy, but it's not going to really get to the core of the emotional eating. So it's looking at, okay, let me take a deep breath. Let me think about, am I really hungry? Sometimes, some people suggest drinking a glass of water and giving yourself 10 minutes and kind of get busy doing something else just to allow yourself time to really see, am I really hungry? One thing is automatically just kind of knowing when was the last time I had a meal. And if I just ate an hour ago or 2 hours ago, then that would be a cue to assess, am I really hungry? What else is going on with me? So taking that deep breath and asking, is it emotional? Is it physical? Eating slowly. Once again, we don't do this a lot because we're rushing a lot, but taking time to actually, and this is part of that mindfulness of really experiencing your food. It gives you a greater appreciation of your food. You feel more satisfied when you're taking your time, you're chewing your food, you're assessing, how you feel while you're eating, what your food tastes like, you enjoy it more, and you don't overeat. So the times that I take my time and I really am listening to my body and paying attention to that, I can tell, okay, I'm full. And once again, if it takes the brain 20 minutes to recognize that you're full, you're allowing that to happen. And so you're better able to feel that and assess, okay, I'm full and I can stop eating now, than when you do that. Um, so you want to, like I said, you want to engage your senses. You want to taste your food. You want to think about what it tastes like and really focus in on that. So that kind of go along with this one about not multitasking. Sometimes we really can't engage fully, because being mindful, it really does take a conscious effort to engage fully in the act. And so that means I don't try to do two things. I don't eat and scroll my phone and watch TikTok or look at Facebook or text people back. I don't eat and watch TV. Um, when I'm eating my meals, I don't try to do more than one thing, because I really want to focus. And I do want to just definitely encourage you. You're, like I said, you're not necessarily going to always adhere to very strict guidelines, but if you can just think of one or two things that you want to really commit to, and then you may gradually add some of these things as you go. So I don't always do everything every time, but I try to commit to one or two of these things every time I have a meal, whether it's eating slowly, not multitasking, really paying attention, really kind of doing some self-talk of asking myself, what is this tasting like to you? Asking myself, do you feel full? Really listening to my body, and then when I understand my roadmap, I understand that one of the things that triggers me is feeling guilty about throwing away food. I'm able to then kind of do some self-talk with myself and say, but is that really healthy? And so, yeah, I may end up throwing away food, but also what it does, it makes me more conscious about how I prepare food. And even if I'm out ordering food, how much I order, so that I can then eliminate feeling guilty about throwing away food. If I only get what I know I'm going to eat. And the only way I kind of learn how much I'm going to consume is if I am regularly attending, being very mindful about how I'm eating, what I'm consuming, and I'm stopping when I'm full. So now I know I can be satisfied off of this amount versus this larger amount. So if I'm preparing food, now I'm more consciously thinking about how much do we really need? How much are we going to really need to be full? And so I'm only going to prepare that amount. So it does take you being very conscious. And so try to, as much as you can, not multitask when you're eating, to really focus in on just that one act. Set a timer is really good. Like set a timer for 20 minutes. That's how long it takes to register. And the thing is not to beat the timer. The thing is to stretch out your meal time to fit within that 20 minutes, so that you're not eating and finishing in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but to pace yourself to eat um, actually within that 20-minute time frame in its entirety. So that kind of keeps you conscious of how fast you're going. Putting your utensils down between bites. Once again, these are just behaviors that help us to slow down and really think about and engage in our senses and be aware of what our body's saying, how it's talking to us. And so sometimes, when we're eating, we may not stop until we're finished, but actually practicing slowing down that whole process. Once again, that's that mindfulness of I'm taking in this entire experience. I'm taking time to chew my food. I'm going to put my utensils down until I'm ready for another bite. I'm going to give myself time to really enjoy that, how it's tasting and how I'm feeling. Take breaks from eating. And one good way to do that is, if you are eating with someone, is to try to consciously not eat the entire time they're talking. So just kind of pace yourself. If they're talking, just make a mental note to periodically stop eating while they're talking and just listen and engage in that conversation. And I think sometimes that definitely contradicts some of the messages and habits that we've been taught growing up about mealtime, such as, don't talk while you don't talk, just eat and you get up and leave. But actually, try to just mentally say, okay, I'm out with a friend. When they eat or when they're talking, I'm just going to take a break from eating and just listen to them engage in that conversation. Once again, that allows your body time and to signal and give you cues that it's full, you know. So that is just those are just some of the techniques that that are very useful, and there are things that I've tried. So I truly believe that they do work. And I think definitely when you're doing that, it helps you become more aware of your stress. So if I know that, okay, I'm emotionally eating and I'm not physically eating, I have to ask myself, what's going on with me emotionally? What am I thinking about? Who's around me? What am I doing? What makes this a particular trigger? And if I know, well, I eat every time I get off the phone talking to my mother, what is that about? Why is that so stressful for me? So that opens the door to really evaluate, are there some other issues going on that I really need to address in a healthier manner than just kind of hiding behind food, or letting food just provide me with that immediate comfort that's not going to be long term. So, like I said, for those of you who may be interested in looking up some research about mindful eating, you can go to these websites, and they have a lot of studies that have been done that have shown that people who have struggled with being diagnosed with obesity, or who have struggled with weight fluctuations and trying to maintain a healthy weight, they have really done well with the mindful eating process. And as one of the strategies, like I said, I know that's not the only strategy, but I do think that's a good foundation, and it opens up the door to stay committed to just not being mindful with just eating, but using that practice in every area of your life, because I do think that multitasking is sometimes a source of creating stress because we're trying to do so many things at one time. So I even use mindfulness, like I said, sometimes just with things I'm doing around my house, I have to talk to myself about staying focused on that one activity and just experiencing that activity and staying engaged in that. Do you all have any questions? I know we had an hour set aside, but it's always different when you're doing this on the thing, because then I don't get to do any type of activities or have any interaction. Questions or comments?
Can you see the questions that
I'm
pop
transferring
up at the
going to
bottom?
it. Do I go to the chat?
Yes, just
Okay.
click on the chat.
Okay. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry that the video was skippy. Okay. Yeah, I think someone was saying they just learned they're an emotional eater, and I was the same way. I really, I never made that connection between emotions and food, and when I just really started studying it, and every time I do this presentation, I feel like I learn something a little bit more about it and a little bit more about my own process with it. And so, and like I said, one of the things that I know that Vivian and Dr. Pinson, they do quite often, they refer people to go through the counseling process prior to them having a procedure done. And that's one of the things that I hear sometimes a lot from people when they come over, is that they'll dismiss the possibility that they're an emotional eater. And they'll say, no, I'm really just not. I'm not an emotional eater at all. I don't think, and so it really requires really trying to educate people, helping them understand that, yeah, they are, that is probably one of the challenges that have kept them kind of, like I said, on that roller coaster. And so for me, I think being just mindful and using some of those practices has really helped. But like I said, I do emphasize that I think the only one of the best ways to really understand that is to really do a log and really understand, you're trying to get a better understanding of what your relationship with food is like. Is just kind of really doing some work in that area. And I've had some people, one of the strategies that I've done with people who have come to counseling prior to having the procedure done is I'll say, kind of we'll talk about what food was going to be their greatest challenge to have to give up and have to do without once they have this procedure done. Because it's so important. I know Vivian may do a good job of that, is trying to get people to really understand that this is not a weight loss program, it's really a lifestyle change. So when you start thinking about it from that angle, you start really thinking about, yeah, your relationship with food, um, and also what's going to happen when I don't have that to go to anymore. How is that going to affect me? So one of the things I ask my clients, I'll say, if they say, well, the soft drinks, that's going to be huge for me, and I'll say, let's go ahead and just give that up right now between now and your next session. And I'm not giving them that recommendation because I'm trying to tell them, because I'm working on the weight loss, or that in that sense, what I'm trying to trigger for them, how do you feel about that? What type of emotions have you experienced when you gave that food up? And so that's been a way that people have really kind of come back and said, you know what, man, I didn't think about that. I was just waiting until after I had their procedure and I was going to give it up, because some people think I'm just not going to have a taste for that anymore. It's just going to take all that away. And they have then come back and said, like, man, that triggers some stuff that I didn't even think about. So now we're just not talking about how to stop eating that food, but we need to look at emotionally, what type of impact does that have on you? And like I said, I try to recommend things that there are some other mindful eating techniques, but I pull the ones that I use regularly because I know they work, and I'm not the most disciplined person, so I feel like if I can do it, anybody can do it. And like I said, they're just very practical things. So mindfulness is really not hard. It just takes us really slowing down. And sometimes we just don't think that we have the time. But, I think that you should feel like you're worth that time, like you're worth slowing down and enjoying your meal. You shouldn't feel like I've got to rush because I've got to take care of somebody else or do something for other people. You really have to say, it's worth me. If I'm making these major changes in my life, then I've got to practice kind of embracing my self-care. And, I'm worth stopping for 20 minutes and enjoying a meal and really, like I said, engaging all my senses in it, and being kind to myself by, listening to my body, learning how to hear when my body is saying you're full, that's enough. And if you're really struggling with that, then that definitely is an indication to me that, okay, maybe I do need to access some outside resources like counseling, someone to kind of help me work through this. Well, if we don't have any more questions, Vivian, I don't know, what do we need to do at this point?
All right. If we do not have any more questions, I really appreciate everyone joining us tonight. And thank you, Valerie, for taking the time out to do this. And
Well,
so
you're
we
welcome.
will reconvene the first Thursday of next month. That will be our next support group. And you're welcome to register right now if you want to. And I hope that you all can join us again. Thank you, Valerie.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.